by drawing another line on a map. This compromise had effectively drawn a line between people and animals in the Serengeti. Pristine Africa to the left, people to the right.
Those rural populations now saw wildlife as government animals. And so coming up to independence, it was said by most people that I knew in the rural areas, as soon as independence comes through, we will take our own back on wildlife, we'll take our own wildlife back. So there was this incredible threat that independence would be a release of the rights to go back and kill wildlife.
No nation has the right to make decisions for another nation. No people for another people.
In the same year Serengeti's new boundaries were fixed, a young history teacher, Julius Nyerere, was preparing to lead his country to independence.
Tanzania didn't start up under President Nyerere as a socialist state, but he very quickly moved into the notion that there was something called African socialism, which should be adopted in the development of the state, because he was very concerned about the inequity that had emerged under the colonial governments. He was very firmly committed to leveling the playing field for all his people in Tanzania, and I think that's what he did effectively. So he saw the vehicle of doing that, African socialism, because it would create that equality.
It was clear from the start that Nyerere's priorities lay with his people. But what would he make of the new national park and a vision of Africa that excluded them? In September 1961, as independence loomed, the conservation world held its breath and focused its attention on the Tanzanian town of Arusha. Here, a conference of 21 African countries and 5 international organizations had gathered to debate the future of conservation in Africa. Julius Nyerere delivered his address to the assembled dignitaries.
The survival of our wildlife is a matter of grave concern to all of us in Africa. We solemnly declare that we will do everything in our power to make sure that our children's grandchildren will be able to enjoy this rich and precious inheritance. These wild creatures, amid the wild places they inhabit, are not only important as a resource of wonder and inspiration, but are an integral part of our natural resources and our future livelihood and well-being.
Not only had he apparently adopted this foreign idea of pristine nature, but there was a commitment to make an absolute priority to look after it for the future. In the years following independence, there was an explosion of park building, resulting in almost a third of Tanzania's land set aside for wildlife, more than any other country today. Even in the new socialist Tanzania, the value of tourism would come before human rights.
The creation of national parks was a grand success. It was a great benefit to the nations of Tanzania and Kenya in creating this fabric of national parks and reserves, which then became the basis of a tourist industry, which rose to #1 in the export economy of both countries. So those have really been the fuel, if you like, for a lot of our economic growth, and they're recognized as such.
Today, Serengeti National Park sees 500,000 visitors a year, who generate $10 million for the state. It not only supports conservation of the animals within the park, but helps finance some of the other less profitable parks in the country. But as the parks have become more and more successful, the expectations of tourists have come to reinforce the pristine vision of Africa.
Let's start with the morning. It is a most splendid orange sunrise. You raise your eyes and right across the plains dotted with acacia trees, giraffes kind of lollop over. To your left, elephants browse. To your right, the distant roar of lions. And no people, no human beings to disturb the space, save the observer of that particular landscape.
Serengeti is the essence of wild Africa. This is the real wild Africa. This is timeless. This is something that is absolutely outside of any human influence, and it's one of the few places left in the world that's like that. That's its theme.
Our obsession to preserve wild Africa has created a pristine fantasy world, a place without people, preserved behind invisible walls. It may well work for tourism, and it has played an important role in the preservation of animals. The problem is that it's a vision that doesn't take into account the bigger picture. Serengeti is not a theme park, it is a real place. A place whose true nature is one of constant change. Nothing is more iconic of Serengeti than the wildebeest migration. For many, the symbol of primordial permanence. But the latest evidence suggests that not so long ago, the climate was very different, and the migration went in a completely different direction to today. And the bigger ecological picture says that the climate will drive change again.
We get serious changes in the climatic regime, which is highly likely as a result of global warming. Then there may be required a change in direction of the wildebeest migration. And if that's the case, then we need to make provision for that.
In the future, if the place where the animals of Serengeti need to be falls outside the boundaries of parks, their chances of survival would seem slim without a vision for wild Africa that transcends the unnatural divide between people and wilderness. In the next programme, we discover how a European idea led to the creation of the original pristine wilderness in the unnatural history of Yellowstone.
And there's more wildlife here on BBC4 on Monday with Bugs on Born to be Wild at 7:30. And then at 8, we're back with the Bear Family and me. Next this evening, though, more Unnatural Histories coming up with a trip to Yellowstone National Park.